Chapter 7. I began seeing Toni about once a week, aside from the Saturday morning yoga classes. We always met at the destination or left from my apartment parking lot. As I got to know her better, I began to experience feelings I hadn't had since my divorce. We were never intimate, although in time we did begin holding hands when we walked. Most evenings ended with a light hug and a chaste kiss. Toni's girlfriends kept encouraging her to move the relationship along physically, but she sensed I wasn't ready for intimacy and continued to allow me to move at my own snail's pace. I had not met her kids, nor had she told them who I was. They were aware she was going out with someone but didn't feel it necessary to push her for details. In their minds, I was just someone mommy knew who wouldn't ever be important to them. The progress in what I was beginning to accept was the start of a relationship might have continued at its glacial pace but for the internet. When I'd begun my prison sentence, the internet was something primarily business-related and worked at the speed of a dial-up connection. I rarely had reason to use it at work, except for emails, and never used it at home. When I'd settled into my apartment, I had not bothered to get a landline, cable TV, or the internet. I didn't own a computer and used my cell phone only for making telephone calls. When I needed to access something that I couldn't find locally, I usually used a computer in the public library, a place I visited regularly to feed my reading habit. As I've noted, my speech to the judge had made the local news and ended up on social media. I really didn't know what that meant and hadn't bothered to ask Maureen or anyone else. It turned out that my blasting of the various news media from the courthouse steps had also worked its way onto social media, courtesy of a bystander who had recorded the entire thing on his phone. I had no idea such a thing was possible at the time I teed off on the news people. I had been Matthew Houston up until I went to prison. When I was released, to further protect my anonymity, I'd begun using the name M. Thomas Houston, and most people who knew me in my new world called me Tommy. I'd occasionally went out to coffee on Saturdays with Toni after class, and sometimes her friends would tag along. I usually put the tab on my credit card, which read Matthew T. Houston, my legal name, which the bank had required me to use. I thought nothing of it at the time. One Saturday, Toni and I were out with two of her girlfriends when the waitress brought the bill. I laid my credit card on the bill holder and got up to go to the bathroom while the waitress processed the charge. Toni's friend Molly looked at the card and then said to her, "So Tommy's real name is Matthew? Have you ever Googled him?" "No. Why would I?" "Just to see what you can find out about him. He'll tell me what I need to know when he's ready." "Well, you should do it." "If you don't, I will." "Please don't." Tommy would feel that to be an invasion of his privacy and a breach of trust. I wouldn't want to make him uncomfortable. At that point I returned to the table, added a tip to the credit card slip, signed it, and we all walked out of the coffee shop. I had no idea that my carefully constructed wall separating me from my old life was about to crumble. The following Saturday morning, all four of Toni's friends met me outside the yoga room. Without even a hello, Molly started the conversation off. "Tommy, we are so sorry." "What? Did something happen to Toni?" "No," Molly replied. "I saw your credit card last Saturday and realized that Tommy wasn't your first name. You're always so tight-lipped about your past, and I was curious, so I googled your name and found out about your losing your family and all the other bad things that happened to you. In prison, you learn to keep your anger in check. If you don't, you get in trouble and you become so focused on the subject of the anger that you lose situational awareness. In a gang-ridden, violent environment, that loss of awareness can be painful or even fatal. Sam had spent hours working on helping me control my anger during the years we'd shared a cell that I exploded. You nosy bitch. I have made clear to you in no uncertain terms from the first time you dragged me off to coffee that there were portions of my life that I do not share and that were off limits. Who else have you told? Just the girls. Toni, too? No. She had asked me not to do this. She's going to be really upset with me for doing it. Then you listen to me and listen good. If you or any of these other women ever tells another person about this, I will hurt you in ways you cannot begin to comprehend. I mean it. Not your husbands, not your girlfriends, not your priest, not your therapist, and certainly not Toni. I'm going to leave now and I won't be back. I don't want to see any of you ever again. And with that, I threw my yoga mat back into the corner of the room and stormed out of the gym. As I was leaving, Toni was coming through the doors. She could see I was upset. Tommy. What's wrong? Where are you going? In the coldest tone of voice I could muster, I looked at her and said, ask your goddamn friends. Then off I went on a run that lasted for hours. When I got back from my run, Toni was sitting on the steps of my apartment building. I could see that she had been crying. Did they tell you? I asked. Molly told me that she went digging in your past, in the part you haven't been willing to share. She said that when she told you she'd done it, you exploded and threatened her. I did, I'm ashamed to say. Did she tell you what she found? No, she didn't. I didn't want to know. You promised me that you would tell me when you were ready and I'm willing to wait. Then why are you here? Because I wanted you to know that I had nothing to do with this. She told me she was thinking about doing it last week and I specifically asked her not to. But she did it anyway. Look, Toni. They're your friends. They've been your friends for years. Well, I don't know what I am. I don't want to make you choose between them and me, but I can't see them or interact with them anymore. They violated my privacy and broke my trust. I can't be with people who I can't trust. I understand. Can I come in? Toni had been in my apartment a handful of times, mostly to use the facilities before we went out or after going out before she went home. I asked her to take a seat and told her to make herself at home. There was wine and beer in the refrigerator and she should help herself. I'd be back in a few minutes after taking a shower. When I came back into the living room, Toni was sitting on one end of the sofa. She had a glass of wine in her hand and had poured one for me, setting it on the coffee table. So, she said, is it time we talked about whatever it is in your past that's keeping you from moving forward? I looked at her for a long, long time. And then I began that I told her the entire, sorry history. I started with college, then marriage, the birth of my children, the conviction, the divorce, the deaths of my parents, the abandonment by my siblings and friends, the termination of my parental rights, the restraining order, my years in prison, the fortuitous discovery of the evidence which proved my innocence, the release from prison, the wrongful imprisonment settlement and settlement with the psychopath's estate, the counseling program that was assisting my re-entry into a world that had changed so much, and the letters I'd written to my children and was still writing every 2 weeks. She asked me if I'd located my parents' graves, my siblings, or my children. I told her that I'd engaged a private investigator to obtain the information. He'd located my parents' graves, which I had visited, provided my siblings' addresses and had given me a separate report on my children, which was sitting unopened on my desk. Then she asked, did you contact your brother and your sister? I wrote to them several weeks ago, giving them an outline of what happened. I asked them for pictures of my father and mother and a memento or two so I'd have something of theirs, but I haven't heard back. What about your children? I asked the private investigator to break that portion of his report into 2 pieces. I've opened and read the piece that describes how they are doing. Both are doing well. Mary is a lawyer and John is a doctor. Mary is married to someone she met in law school. John is dating another doctor. Neither has any children yet. I haven't opened the portion of the report that tells me where they are, how to contact them, or what their last names are. Any information about my ex-wife is in the portion I haven't opened yet. I'm not sure what to do and I'm afraid to make a decision for fear of losing what little I have left of them. If I contacted them and they didn't want to have anything to do with me, they would truly be gone forever. At least now, I have a memory of 2 little children who loved me and who I loved beyond all reason. What are you going to do with the letters? I've left instructions as part of my estate plan for my executor to contact my children and provide copies of the letters to each of them. I want them to know that their father loved them and thought constantly about them, even though he couldn't be in their lives. What about the restraining order? As far as I know, it's still in effect. Having been inside, I have no desire to go back, and there's a risk that violating the order would put me back in a cell. Have you thought about having it overturned? After all, it was granted based upon an erroneous conviction and the court's conclusion that the conviction made you an unfit parent. Besides, the expectation was that you would be in prison for the rest of your life. You've been exonerated and you are no longer a prisoner. Wouldn't that require contact with my ex and my children? They're the ones being protected from me. That would be the same as opening that envelope over there. My ex-husband and I are still on speaking terms, even if he couldn't keep it in his pants. He owes me a couple of favors. How about if I get him to look into the process for you? He can tell you what you'd have to do to have the order revoked and you could make an informed decision. Let me think about it some more. There are way too many people here who know my story now. Adding a couple of more, even if they are lawyers, is not something I'm ready to do. Where are the letters you wrote to your children? I pointed to a series of 3-ring binders on a bookshelf next to my desk. Over there. May I read some of them? Why would you want to do that? You and I are never going to be able to move forward unless I understand more about how you've been hurt and how to deal with your loss. I think that seeing some of those letters will help me understand. They might even let me help you make a decision on what you should do. Okay. Some of them are pretty grim. The latest ones are better, particularly the ones where I talk about you. Given what you've told me today, I'm not surprised. I've seen some pretty bad stuff as a PA. I think I can handle whatever is in those binders. Your choice. If you really think it would help us, go ahead. But don't be surprised if you end up sorry you did it. When I finished, Toni did something she'd never done before. She stood up, walked over to me, sat down in my lap, wrapped her arms around me and laid her head on my shoulder. She didn't say a word, just hugged me. I don't know how long she sat there. I was physically exhausted from the run and emotionally exhausted from telling her my story. I fell asleep with her in my lap, her head on my shoulder and our arms wrapped around each other. When I awoke several hours later, she was sitting at my desk, a volume of the letters to my children open in front of her. She looked over at me and said, "Tommy Houston, this is the most incredible love story I've ever read. No one has ever told me they loved me with the intensity that these letters tell your children how you loved them. As much as I love my children, I've never been able to convey that love with the depth and sincerity that these letters convey your love for Mary and John. You have to let them see them. Now, when you are still around so they can respond, not when all they can do is wish you told them before you died. I only wish my ex-husband felt a fraction of the love for Bobby and James that you feel for your children, even though you haven't seen them for decades. Please don't hide these from them any longer." She went on. "I haven't told you this because I was afraid you weren't ready to hear me say it. I'm in love with you, Tommy. Any doubts I might have had about you disappeared this afternoon when I read what you wrote. I don't know another man who has so much love in his heart. If I could have even a small piece of that love, I think I'd be the most loved woman I know. I'm not saying this to put pressure on you or even to ask you to respond. I just want you to know that you are not alone, that there is someone who loves you and wants to share your life completely." "Toni," I said, "I'm the most badly damaged person I know who's not in prison. I've been trying to put the pieces of my life back together and I have no assurances that I will ever succeed in making those pieces into something that anyone would want to share. My counselor can explain just how damaged I am better than I can, but I'm not sure even she has a full understanding. Do you really want to take a chance on a guy like me? Do you want to risk having your kids deal with me? If it comes to it, are you willing to choose between your friends and me? You've known me for months and them for years, even decades. They are your support network. And what will your ex say? It's one thing to ask him to take me on as a client, but another altogether as a male figure in his children's lives. Are you willing to take those kinds of risks for the likes of me? She looked silently at me for what seemed to be forever. Then she stood up, walked across the room to me, wrapped her arms around me, said, "Yes, I am. You're worth all of that and more." And then she kissed me like I hadn't been kissed in almost 25 years.